background. And what I like to do in my trading psychology work is I take my own personal trading experience. I take what I've learned from some of the best traders in the world who I've been fortunate to work with, and I take that experience and I combine that with my keeping up with neuroscience, the fact that there's a lot of changes in research in neuroscience and brain research and psychology. So I basically apply the latest neuroscience to peak performance. So let's get into the webinar today. You know, everyone is looking for an edge, right? And there are a variety of ways to gain some kind of an edge in trading. And the one that is the least tapped, the edge that's the least tapped by the majority of traders, is the behavioral or psychological. High-level athletes will do, they'll do whatever it takes to get an edge, and will often talk about the mental aspect of their sport. And we hear it all the time. We read about it in books, we hear about it in interviews, and most high-level athletes will actually do something about the mental aspect of the sport, right? They're not just going to read books about it. As a matter of fact, the U.S. Olympic Committee, I have a friend who's a sports psychologist and works with Olympic athletes, that's how I know this. The U.S. Olympic Committee advises all coaches of U.S. athletes to address the mental aspect and recommends that they bring in outside experts to actually work in this area with the athletes. So it's not just something they want athletes to read about, they want them to actually engage in it. Now, we don't just see this in sports, but in business and executive coaching, which I do some work in as well, and even in the military and law enforcement, where I've also done some work in the past, there's a lot of psychological consultants, and more recently, even companies, financial companies and other companies now have their own internal behavioral science unit. I was a consultant in this area many, many years ago for a major financial company, long before it was popular. Now, given that markets have become more automated recently, how you use your technology or the data really is more of an edge than ever now. Because if you ignore psychology, you are truly at a disadvantage. The case for psychology obviously is really clear if you're a discretionary trader, but even traders with more mechanical systems can definitely benefit from psychology. For a mechanical trader, for instance, knowing when and when not to modify your system and being able to control your action is key, just as key as it is for a discretionary trader. Now, I just want to, before we move more into the content, I just want to say something about sports as well. Although I don't golf myself, there's a really good analogy for trading that I heard from a friend who is a pretty accomplished golfer, and what he told me was that most golfers agree that a large part of golf is mental, but then most golfers end up spending the majority, most of their time, working on the mechanics of their swing, or maybe researching the purchase of new clubs. And even though most golfers know that the mental aspect is a big part, they don't do much about it. So I have a question here for everyone listening in on this webinar, for all of the attendees right now. Now, you don't have to type the answer into the room. In fact, maybe you shouldn't, but just write it on a piece of paper for yourself. In your opinion, how big a part does psychology play in trading? Is it 10%, 30%, 50%, 80%, 90%? Write down the number that represents your belief of what percentage psychology plays in trading. Now, after you write down that number, I want you to consider how much of your time, your energy, your focus is devoted to psychology. Highly likely, you're going to see a pretty big disconnect, big difference between these two numbers. And this disconnect is common among traders. So what happens is that in addition to either not having an edge or not able to articulate their edge, which I'll talk about in terms of trading, and that's one of the things that Market Delta does really well, especially with the footprint. One of the reasons that most traders don't succeed or improve is because they expect that just reading about trading psychology is a trading psychology strategy. That's not a trading psychology strategy. You actually have to include trading psychology into your plan itself. I think it was Einstein, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Einstein who defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And speaking of Einstein, when it comes to trading psychology, a lot of traders think that we should be more like this guy on the slide, Mr. Spock, that that's the way to go. Spock, he's a hero to a lot of people, right? He assesses the situation and makes a purely rational decision based on logic without any emotion. And, it's often easy to think that it would be nice to be like Spock when it comes to trading, to always be logical and rational. But the reality is we are not Vulcans. At least I know I'm not. We have human brains, and our brains respond to uncertainty much differently than Spock's Vulcan brain. Now, I don't know a lot about, in fact, I don't really know anything about Vulcan brains, but I do know quite a bit about human brains. And one of the things that I know about human brains is that human brains can have something called an HPA axis, which stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA. And I'm just selecting one thing to talk about. There's a lot of different areas in neuroscience I can cover. But just for example, the HPA is a very complex set of direct influences between these three areas of the brain. It represents a complex interaction of direct influences and feedback interactions among these three areas. And what this HPA axis controls, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis controls, it controls reactions to stress. It regulates your digestion, your immune system, your mood, and your emotions, and even energy storage and expenditure, how much energy you need to store up and have for the future. So we'll get more into some neuroscience later on, but I wanted to just kind of touch on it a little bit here in the beginning. Now, historically, emotion and reason have been considered to be opposing forces, right? It's kind of what Spock and Kirk are all about, two kind of opposites. However, recent psychological and neuroscientific research has been revealing that emotion and cognition are closely intertwined. Neuroscience research is confirming what I've sensed for a long time, that emotion determines, it mediates, it facilitates how we perceive our world and organize our memory and make important decisions. And, I often get emails or I'm asked by traders, what are the traits that make a good trader? What do you see in terms of personality characteristics among good traders? And, some of the research says that it's conscientiousness is one factor. Other research says that it's cognitive ability or cognitive flexibility. And of course, those things definitely play a role. In my experience as a trading psychology coach, what I've seen is that it kind of depends, first of all, when it comes to the research on personality traits, it kind of depends on what the researcher is looking for and how they set up the research in the first place. But in general, cognitive ability, especially the ability to process information, certainly does play a role in trading. But again, in my experience working with some of the best traders in the world, one of the key traits that I see with them is the ability to tolerate discomfort in order to control one's actions and behavior. So they can, basically act in line with their strategy. In other words, the key trait that I see is a combination of flexibility and resilience. So how do we become more resilient and more flexible, right? What is discipline in trading? What is it really? Everyone talks about being more disciplined, but rarely do you get much more than telling you to be more disciplined. You don't usually get much in the way of instructions on how to do it. And how do you stick to your plan? I mean, how do you tolerate the inevitable discomfort and disappointments along the way? The waiting for the setup, having to take a loss, having to manage a trade that's not quite at the target. What do you do? Well, I'm going to tell you this, that promising yourself that next time I'm going to be more patient, or next time I'll get out when I should, that's what most traders are doing. They make promises to themselves, then beat themselves up when they don't make good on their promises to do better next time. They often may even borrow a set of rules from another trader, something that they saw on a website, a blog somewhere, or maybe a mentor somewhere, or a friend. They take the rules, or maybe they even develop a set of rules for themselves to follow, believing that they can kind of white knuckle it through and not veer from the rules. But relying on willpower alone is not realistic. There is a huge difference between learning from one's mistakes and constantly berating oneself about the mistakes. So I'll just want to say something about willpower specifically. Willpower is not a sustainable form of discipline because willpower is actually a finite resource and is not really sustainable primarily for some biological reasons. Decision-making and willpower depends a lot on glucose levels, blood sugar. When we make more and more decisions, it burns up glucose, and low glucose levels are associated with less willpower. So I will tell you, there's a lot of research on this. There's a lot of research on willpower and the limitations of willpower. I'm not going to get into the details here because I've got a lot of other stuff I want to share with you, but I would point you in the direction of reading the research by Roy Baumeister. If you're interested in it, you can send me an email later and I'll send you the link to his work. You can also look at the Wikipedia entry on ego depletion or decision fatigue, and you'll see how willpower is not really something you want to focus on. I mean, it's something you want to develop, but it's not the end-all be-all for discipline. There are other ways to develop discipline, which I'll talk about today. The use of positive thinking is also an attractive way of thinking about discipline or to help us get through the trading difficulties that we're facing. And positive thinking does have a place, no doubt. Positive thinking in terms of having a positive vision for your future is important. But in and of itself, a positive vision of your future can be easily overwhelmed when you experience a trade tick by tick in the present moment, where each tick in your favor brings a sense of hope or relief, and then each tick against you feels like a personal attack. Trying to rely on positive self-talk is not going to be enough to get most traders through this pressure of the tick-by-tick experience of a trade. And the proof is that most traders still make the same mistakes even when they're using positive self-talk. And this kind of reminds me of a trader named Bob, who is someone who's can probably relate to Bob. I'm sure a lot of people can. Bob puts a lot of hours into his trading in more ways than one. He studies the charts. He's got spreadsheets and intermarket correlations and spreadsheets of his own trading stats. He's pretty much glued to the screen during the entire market day. He's very busy. And Bob's a hard worker. Working hard is second nature to him. He's worked really hard to get into the right college. He earned a degree in engineering, graduated near the top of his class at a prestigious university. He was really lucky when he entered the workforce because at the time the economy was rolling along and recruiters were seeking people just like Bob. And the freedom to be his own boss is what brought him into trading, becoming the master of his own destiny. But with all his hard work, Bob is still about a break even in terms of his P&L. What Bob doesn't realize is that the skills that made him a good engineer are not the same skills that will make him a good trader. Yeah, there's a certain amount of study involved in trading, no doubt, but in the final analysis for a trader, it's about how you respond to discomfort, not how much you study the charts and not how many spreadsheets you have. Now, Bob, like a lot of traders, did well on a simulator, but with cash, he just succumbs to the anxiety of interacting with a market that's in constant motion, that will always show some noise and ambiguity. And as an engineer, this is a hard, ambiguity is a hard thing. Bob realizes that, that his background as an engineer might be an issue. His hesitation to enter when he sees the signal and the ability to hold a winning trade, really is what is preventing him from succeeding. Like a lot of perfectionists, Bob is getting in his own way. And like many perfectionists, interacting with something as messy as the market brings up a lot of anxiety. But instead of dealing with the issue, Bob's going to spend a lot more time searching for the answer in the charts and in the spreadsheets. Deep down, Bob knows the solution to his problem is within him, not in the charts. But what happens to Bob? All right, so the area of the unconscious, the subconscious that influences on our trading. I could easily do an entire webinar or a series of webinars just on this one topic alone, but I've got a lot of good stuff and some practical tips I want to share with you later in the webinar, so I'm going to keep this brief. I'm not going to address unconscious issues when it comes to things like beliefs that were developed in childhood and things like that, although those are very important. I'm not going to get into that in this webinar. In fact, I'm just going to talk about some other aspects of unconscious influence, and the first one I'll talk about is priming. Okay, And priming is an example of the power of our subconscious around how we see things and how we decide. Priming happens all the time. Here's how it can work in trading. In fact, this is some empirical research, actual research that was conducted. I can share with you. So what they did is they took a group of professional traders, professionals, not amateurs, and they showed the effects of priming on risk-taking very clearly. They took this group of professional traders and they primed them by having them all read an article. Actually, they had half of them read an article about a person visiting a casino, and in that article, in that story, the person began to trade very aggressively, very heavily. And then they had the other half of the group read an article about somebody visiting a casino who just kind of wanders through the casino and doesn't stop and gamble at all, just kind of walks through and no gambling whatsoever. Then they put both groups, after reading those two different stories, very graphic stories, they put both groups on a simulator. Well, the group that read the more aggressive story about the aggressive gambling started taking much more risk on the simulator as in their trading. And the group that had just read about somebody walking through a casino but not gambling, they put on much less risk. As a matter of fact, they also replicated the research, and they had the same people exposed to both stories to make sure there were no differences between traders. And they found that the same traders would be affected by the priming as well. So it's very interesting research. Here's another example of priming. I'm sorry, another example of the unconscious at work. This one is called framing. This is one that probably people are familiar with if you've read about behavioral economics. Pretty well known and pretty well researched. It comes from prospect theory, also known as loss aversion theory. So if you were to give a group of people $100, if I gave everybody here listening to me $100, and then I asked you to choose between A, where you keep $40 for sure, or B, where you lose $40 for sure, I can tell you there's about 65% of you, approximately 2/3 of you, will choose A. But the funny thing is, A and B are identical. You should really see kind of a split, 50-50 between A and B, because they're identical. So why is it that more people will select A? And the reason is because A is worded in terms of gains, whereas B is worded in terms of losses, even though the net effect is the same. This is a well-known phenomenon known as loss aversion, where most people do whatever they can to avoid even the perception of loss, even the perception of loss. Now, an interesting side note here is that marketing and advertising people understand how to capitalize on the natural human inclination of loss aversion. If something is on sale at a store, for instance, that store is going to sell much more products if they tell their customers how much more they're going to save, not how much less they're going to spend. So another way that the unconscious works is that we don't see the market as it is. We see it as we are. I'm going to say that again. It's very important. We don't see the market as it is. We see it as we are. If you give 10 people the same chart, you're going to get 10 different interpretations. And the reason is that our beliefs, our expectations, and our emotions all come together and act as a filter on our perception of everything, including the market. And that filter projects a structure onto the market that forms the basis for our entry and exit decisions. It is basically human nature to see things through our own personal filter. And later in this webinar, I'm going to talk more about this filter and how to work with it to maximize your performance. But for now, I want to tell you about the fact that it's not simply that past experiences, both in trading and experiences that have nothing to do with trading, determine how we view and approach the present based upon beliefs we've created. Instead, our present beliefs are governed by past experiences that are linked to unconscious emotional memories. Unconscious emotional memories. Emotion is a main ingredient in developing beliefs, and then re-experiencing of the same or similar emotion is what helps keep the belief in place. So one very important aspect of changing self-limiting beliefs is to first understand how and why you develop the belief in the first place, and to look at how the belief continues to be supported through the re-experiencing of emotions tied to the original conflict. And when you do this type of self-analysis, do this type of work, it means you have to understand that what you are feeling and why you are feeling it is very important, understanding the context of your feelings. And I'll talk more about this in a future slide in this webinar, but it's an important concept to convey. Now, I like to often put this in a tweet. I remind this to my clients all the time. My clients know this. It's not enough to know what causes the market to move. It's equally important to know what causes you to move. As a matter of fact, I think it actually may be more important to know what causes you to move. In trading, we have to make split-second decisions during what I call a hot state, right? When we're under stress, perhaps right after a loss or even after a win or when we're feeling anxious. Now, listening to me right now in this webinar, chances are you're probably not trading. Or when you're reading a book about trading psychology, you know, you're relatively calm and you're probably agreeing with what the book says or with what I'm saying. But when you start trading again, whether it's tomorrow or later today or whenever it is, when you start trading again, you will no longer be in this state that you're in right now as you listen to me. Okay? Will you be able to do the things that I'm talking about when you're in a hot state as opposed to a relatively cool, calm, and collected state right now? Now, in the market, price generally follows the path of least resistance, which we see as price going up and down in search of more buyers and more sellers. You know, and if you're a student of auction market theory or market profile, then you know what I mean. In many ways, the human mind tends to follow the path of least resistance as well. We, as humans, what happens is we seek out comfort and we try to avoid pain or discomfort. It's that path of least resistance. So what I'm saying is that while price follows the path of least resistance, the path that we must follow as a trader may involve pushing ourselves beyond our comfort level. Price may take that path of least resistance, but as a trader, you're going to have to take possibly the path of most resistance. But it's okay. I'm going to show you how you can do it. A common pattern for a trader in a drawdown or maybe red for the day or week is to either gun it or, you know, eat like a bird, take small profits and poop like an elephant, you know, with large losses. They take the path of least resistance. They either take those tiny profits because they're afraid to lose a small unrealized profit, you know, or they hold that loser too long and add to it that smoking hopium trade. And then they end up with a very large loss, not to mention the loss of opportunity while they were sitting with that loser. So these are just a few examples of how raw, unacknowledged, and unexpressed emotion can easily result in an impulsive behavior such as an impulse trade. Psychologists like myself, we like to sometimes refer to it as acting out. Instead of tolerating the feeling of loss or missing out or tolerating the anxiety, instead the trader acts out the feeling. And later on in this webinar, I'm going to outline a very specific technique that's going to help you to decrease the odds that you act out your feelings. And I just want to share a short story about a trader who is struggling with this, named Malcolm. Is a trader that many of you can probably relate to. He's what I refer to as a give-back trader. Very common problem in trading. Like a lot of traders, Malcolm, not every morning, but very often he'll start out pretty well, pretty decent in the morning. But by the end of the day or by midday, he's given back a lot of his profits, and sometimes he's even in the red at that point. And you know, sometimes he recognizes the problem as, you know, I made some money and that felt so good. I want to keep going and make some more very soon. So then he starts taking trades that are less than optimal. Other times it's just simply the idea of just one more trade and I can get over that kind of certain P&L goal or certain number that he's kind of locked onto in his mind. But often what happens in reality is that this last trade or this extra trade ends up costing him dearly, and he becomes so frustrated after it that he continues to trade even after that, often with a combination of impulsive trades and trades where he gets out too early, kind of oscillating back and forth. And he finds himself in a pretty deep hole by the end of the day. Super common, very, very, very common pattern I just described. So speaking of patterns, one of the things is to know about yourself is that humans are natural pattern seekers. The brain is a natural pattern seeker. And one of the reasons why is because, you know, the reason why we survived the hunter-gatherer phase of human history hundreds of thousands of years ago, you know, back then we had predators that were bigger, faster, stronger than humans. The only reason why humans really survived was because we could adapt to our situation. We can adapt to the environment very quickly, recognize patterns that suggest patterns that suggest threat or opportunity in our environment. So our ancestors who were good at recognizing patterns of threat or opportunity survived, and they passed on their genes. So therefore, we're all pretty good natural pattern seekers. But there's a problem in trading. The ability to recognize a pattern is not enough. It's an important step. It's a crucial step, but it's not enough on its own for a trader to succeed. The ability to act in your best interest when you see a pattern is what determines your success as a trader. And the ability to recognize your own patterns is a really big part of this. So most traders are focusing on what I call the external data. Okay, they're focusing on patterns in the information outside of themselves. They're looking at the market, the news, the charts, things like that. But in the heat of the moment, when we are under pressure or when the external data becomes ambiguous, what happens is the brain still needs data to help it decide what to do. And what happens is that the internal data influences our perception and our judgment and how we interact with the external data. So understanding and recognizing key patterns in the internal data is a critical part of improving how you respond to risk, opportunity, and uncertainty. So on this slide, I have a few examples of the internal data. And this is not a complete list. And it's a very, not only is it a potentially a very large list, but there's a lot of interaction, complex interaction between within the internal data in terms of the mind-body connections and things like that. But I'll just highlight a few. One of them to pay attention to is sleep. Okay, sleep is a very large factor in your trading. There's been empirical research done with at least 4 different groups that I'm aware of: professional traders, professional poker players, commercial airline pilots, and surgeons. With all 4 groups, under conditions of sleep deprivation, they become more risk tolerant, and they often are willing to seek out more risk than they normally would. So that's really key. In fact, I've seen other research that says that if you get less than 5 hours of sleep, you're working drunk. So I think we can apply that to trading. Less than 5 hours of sleep, you're trading drunk. Now, glucose, another physiological factor. Like I mentioned earlier, glucose is a big variable in our degree of willpower. And something to remember is that although the brain only accounts for 2% of total body weight, our brain utilizes approximately 25% of the body's available glucose. Okay, it just sucks it up. So this is where I can throw up nutrition and food intake on this physiological part of the slide as well, because the types of food we eat determines often the level of many neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters, serotonin, other things like that. The building blocks of those neurotransmitters comes in the form of amino acids. So if you don't have a good diet, you're kind of putting yourself at a cognitive disadvantage. So diet has a big part of it as well. HRV, which stands for heart rate variability. I use a lot of biofeedback in my own trading, and I do it with some of my one-on-one coaching clients, where basically the idea is you learn to manage your heart rate variability, which in some ways can be a proxy for your emotional state, and it's a very can have a very big impact on your trading. Like I said, there's a lot of complex interaction within the internal data, which I'm not going to get into, testosterone and cortisol and the ratios between the two, and so many other things. But the main idea, and I'll get into this later towards the end, I'm going to give you guys some practical tips, is what I want you to realize at this point, your take home, your takeaway from this, is you have to manage your physical energy, manage the physical body. Trading is not just mental, it's critical to manage the physical aspect as well. Now also as part of this internal data is I have emotions listed here. Our feelings about our P&L, our feelings about our social status, and not only that, which I don't have on the slide, is the fact that emotions are often unconscious. As I mentioned earlier, the way those self-limiting beliefs that we have that don't go away, the reason why they're still there is because they're supported by unconscious emotion. We start to experience feelings without even realizing what the feeling is, and then we let it go and we let it occur, and it just takes on a life of its own, and it supports the belief, and that's what happens. So working with emotions is critical, and I'm going to talk more about it here in a little bit. I will say this though before I talk about it, one of the most common areas that's often talked about in trading psychology is emotion, right? That word is used a lot. And I hope by now that you can see that the idea that emotions must be eliminated is not really realistic. In fact, emotion should be seen as a source of information. That's really what one of the primary purposes of emotion is, to give us information about our environment and how we are interacting with our environment. So let me talk a little bit about emotions and some neuroscience research. There's an important quote that I have here up on the screen. I'm going to read it out loud. This was a quote from Jennifer Lerner, who is a social psychologist at Harvard. She does a lot of research with traders, a lot of behavioral economics, a lot of behavioral finance research. And she tells us that the empirical literature suggests that emotions influence numerous cognitive processes: selective attention, evaluative judgments, perceptions of risk, and estimates of value and causality. Her empirical research is actually showing this. This is not just her opinion, but research in the lab is showing this. And I can tell you that in our everyday environment, and especially when trading, we are confronted with a large amount of incoming information. And as the capacity of our brain is limited, we cannot process all that information. We have to select a subset to prioritize its processing at the cost of other information. So the competition for neural processing resources and preferential access, basically, to conscious awareness is organized by a dedicated attention system. And emotion is very much a part of this attention system. In other words, the way the brain is wired means that emotions are elicited as an individual continuously evaluates objects, events, and situations with respect to their relevance to the individual needs, goals, and values. In fact, the recent neuroscience, the research is really proving that the old idea of successful decision-making that depends on the rational frontal lobes of the prefrontal cortex to control our urges arising from that more primitive part of the brain, the limbic system, that's not really very accurate. That's old thinking. You'll probably still hear people till this day talk about that, but that's kind of old thinking. It's not accurate. I've always sensed this, but what the researchers are now discovering and providing empirical evidence of is that effective decision-making is not possible without the motivation and meaning provided by emotional input. So let me just share with you a little bit about some of this neuroscience research and how this all came to be. I'm going to try and do it briefly and without getting too detailed, so don't bore you. I'm just going to hit the highlights here. But Antonio Damasio is one of the leading brain scientists in the world today. And besides being a brain scientist, he's also a neurologist who also sees patients as well, patients who have brain damage. And one of his patients, Elliot, was a very successful businessman who underwent neurosurgery for a tumor in which the orbital frontal cortex, which is a structure that connects the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe area, with the emotional areas of the brain, that orbital frontal cortex structure was damaged. And a damaged or severed orbital frontal cortex, basically what that means is now the connection between the frontal lobes and the emotional areas of the brain has been severed. That connection has been cut off. And as a result, Elliot became a real-life Mr. Spock. He was basically devoid of any emotion. But surprisingly, instead of this making him perfectly rational, he became paralyzed by every decision in life. So the point of that research is that we actually need emotion to make decisions. The fact that we require emotional input means that we're not the cold, rational agents like Spock, that traditional economics, says that we should be. There's no way we can ever become that. We're not Vulcans. Now, researchers like Damasio and Jennifer Lerner from Harvard, who I talked about on the previous slide, and other researchers as well, there's a whole group of them now, they're providing some really fascinating empirical neuroscientific evidence about all this. And I'll tell you that prior to this neuroscientific evidence in the last 3, 4, 5 years, researchers like Daniel Kahneman, he's very famous for his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he demonstrated years ago, that showed up in his book just a few years ago, but he did the research many years ago, demonstrated the negative emotional impact of losses is twice as intense as the positive effect of gains. And this type of intense emotional reaction affects our decision-making in fairly predictable ways, such as taking on more risk by holding or adding to a loser in an attempt to avoid the intense feeling of a losing trade. All right, as I promised earlier, I want to spend some time giving you guys a specific technique you can use to manage your emotions. And I just want to begin by saying, like I mentioned earlier in this webinar, that right now, chances are, while you're listening to me, you're not trading, you're in a relatively calm state. And you're probably agreeing with a lot of what I've already said. But I bet most of you, come tomorrow morning, will be back to your old tricks. And so I'm going to give you a technique that will possibly help you to not fall back into those old patterns. So think of emotion like water, okay? Water will always find an outlet, so we have to provide an outlet for the water. If you don't, it finds its own outlet. And emotions will find outlets in the form of a behavior, or sometimes they somaticize into the body, right? You have a gastrointestinal issue, become a headache, muscle tension, a disease process of some sort. So take the word motion, M-O-T-I-O-N, add an E to the beginning, and what do you get? This is why you need a strategy to manage emotions, okay? Emotion is motion plus energy. So here's what you want to do. It's going to be helpful in your trading. Think of two types of, or categories of emotion, two types of emotion. There's one we can call present state emotion, or your current emotion, or what you're feeling right now. And then there's anticipated emotion, what you anticipate you might feel like in the future. Now, although current emotion needs to be addressed, I want you to know that anticipatory emotion are also extremely powerful motivators, just as powerful as current emotion and sometimes more powerful. For example, the anticipatory emotion of potential future regret. Oh, if this trade comes back after I get out, I'll feel horrible. I'll feel like an idiot. Fall for the banana in the tailpipe trick again. So that potential future regret is often what keeps people holding on to losers, right? That's a great example of it. Another example is when you are in a winning trade, but it's not yet at the target, and you're feeling nervous about it. And as you start to get more anxious, and you start seeing your unrealized gains beginning to evaporate in front of you, you start to anticipate the regret of not taking a profit, and you end up getting out too early. And that momentary gratification of taking the small profit gives you some temporary relief and makes you feel better at the moment. There's that old saying that no one ever went broke taking a profit. But yet, this early exit also helps you to avoid the powerful feeling of future regret, right? But the irony is that chances are you're going to feel regret, and anyways, massive regret, when you see that the trade goes on to your target after you take your small profit. So here's a simple but very effective model of managing emotion, especially current emotion, but it even works for future anticipatory emotions. Always think of taking 3 A's before you take action, okay? The first A is anticipate emotion, like I mentioned. Emotion is inevitable. It's how we're wired. You need to expect it. You need to understand what types of emotions are going to happen for you based upon who you are. You need to be looking for them, anticipate them, okay? And then once you start to recognize that an emotion is present, you need to acknowledge it. You need to put it into words. You need to be as graphic and as vivid as possible and descriptive. Acknowledge it, express it, put that feeling into words as much as possible. And then you want to analyze the emotion. When have you had this emotion before? What has it led you to before in terms of behavior? What might this emotion be connected to? Why are you having this emotion? By doing this process, anticipating, acknowledging, and analyzing the emotion, you're basically managing your emotion. That's what this is one model. There's many different models. This is one model of managing emotion. It's a very simple model, but it's very, very effective. But the model is only as effective as you are in actually doing each of the 3 steps. And I will tell you that it does require ability to identify emotion. A lot of people have trouble identifying emotion. You have to be able to identify what you're feeling. Often a physical sensation can be a good place to start. It doesn't have to necessarily be an emotional, a mental version of an emotion. It can also be a physical sensation. But it does take practice to identify, anticipate emotion. A lot of people have trouble with that. Now, one way to manage the intensity of anticipatory emotion, like this is the one where you're watching the market and you are having a hard time sitting on your hands, you want to jump in, but you know you had issues with impulse trades and you really want to control yourself today. You don't want to jump in that market. What I'm going to suggest you can do for yourself is you need to project yourself into the future emotional state by asking yourself, how will I feel later if I jump in the market right now? How will I feel later? How will I feel at the end of the night? How will I feel tomorrow if I take this impulse trade now? And this technique of asking yourself about the future feeling, it's a very common technique that psychologists use. I didn't create it myself. It's a technique that I borrowed from others. It's a technique that is often used with people who are trying to diet, actually, and fight the urge to eat a second helping or go for that piece of chocolate cake. Now, I want to get more practical here with everybody. One of the problems that we run into trading is that we experience that trade tick by tick, or each tick in our favor brings that sense of hope or relief, and each tick against us really kind of brings us to that place of fear again. It feels like an assault against us, an attack against us. So one of the ways we can deal with that is by focusing on process goals, okay? Process goals versus outcome goals. Process goals are things that you have control over, but it takes practice, and there's different types of process goals. Outcome goals, that's the outcome of your trade. That's determined by the market primarily. That's your P&L. Now, we can control our actions, but whether the trade works or not is outside of our control. So an example of a process goal would be, there's a lot of different types. There's advanced, there's basic, there's simple, there's a lot of different types of process goals. So here's a few different examples. One type of process goal would be to develop a pre-market routine for yourself in the morning before the market opens. And that could include sub-goals, sub-process goals like meditation or exercise or engaging in some type of pre-market routine that helps you to focus and be mentally prepared. Another type of process goal would be to do real-time journaling that includes your emotions and thoughts while you're trading, and then rereading those journal entries the next day before you start trading, making that a goal every day. And another type of process goal would be, this is maybe a homework assignment for everyone, you can all do this on your own, is to categorize all your trades into one of 4 types of trades. Type 1, which is where you follow your plan and you make money. That's a good kind of trade. We all like those. Type 2, where you follow your plan, but the trade is a loss. It's the cost of business trade, right? And we don't like those, but they happen. Type 3 is where we veer from our plan and we lose money, okay? And then type 4 trades are where we veer from our plan, but we actually make money. Those are the worst kinds of trades. Those are the most dangerous. I would suggest that you categorize your trades. You should see most of them hopefully in the type 1 and type 2. If you see even just 1 or 2 trades in that type 4 category, look out, because it's really hard. Really hard. Once you've had 1 or 2 impulse trades that you get paid for, it's more difficult to kind of break that behavior. But you need to understand how strong that connection is. You should look at how many type 4 trades do you actually had. How many do you have ongoing? Because if you have a lot, you've got a harder road ahead of you in terms of your trading psychology, to be honest. And another example of a process goal would be to use what I like to do a lot in my trading, and I do it with my coaching clients, is using self-directed questions, where you make it a goal to continually ask yourself certain questions while trading. You know, market profile has the questions of like, what has the market done recently? What is it doing now? How good of a job is it doing? So there's market-directed questions. Well, I think we should also be using self-directed questions. And some examples of self-directed questions would include what I call kind of the grandfather, the granddaddy of all self-directed questions is, am I acting in my own best interest right now? Am I acting in my own best interest right now? That's a great question to be asking yourself throughout the day. Another question you can ask would be, on a scale of 1 to 100, how much pressure am I feeling right now? What are my options? How can I respond to this pressure? Now, when you ask these questions, I'm going to suggest that you do them out loud, where you hear yourself. You can do this if you're not on a trading desk. If you trade on your own at home, it's easy to do it out loud, or you can write it out on paper. I would suggest that you do that, but not do it in your head. If you simply go through this exercise in your head, it will not have the impact that you want it to have. It's highly likely, I should say, it won't have the impact. Much more likely that it will be powerful if you can hear your own voice or actually use your hand to write it out. Now, I'm also going to say that finding the right process goals is very helpful in breaking bad habits and developing new, better habits. Finding the right process goals be a little bit different for each trader. That's one of the things that I do in my coaching, is develop kind of meaningful process goals that reflects the unique situation of the trader. I want to share a little bit of information with you guys about developing the right type of confidence, because confidence is one of the precursors, it's one of the foundations to discipline, okay? So in addition to having a plan that reflects who you are, having rules that reflect who you are, not just rules that you borrowed from someone else, and in addition to having an edge that you understand and articulate, that you can articulate what your edge is, because those are definitely prerequisites to successful trading. Besides those two things, you also have to have the right type of confidence to be able to stick to your plan. And I define confidence a little differently than most people do. I define confidence as resilience in the face of disappointment, okay? This is the type of confidence that you need to develop in order to tolerate the discomfort of waiting, of losing, of missing out, all the things that we have to face in trading. And like I said, it differs from the usual form of confidence that tends to be associated with just recent results or recent outcomes. So here are 4 concepts or tips to point you in the right direction to develop this right type of confidence. First one is self-understanding, okay? Using emotion analytics to help you become aware of the underlying subconscious motivations driving your behavior. Self-acceptance, that's basically, you know, the idea behind that is without acceptance, it's more likely that we will act out the emotion. If you ignore the emotion, it is much more likely that you're going to succumb to it. The power of acceptance also has a very unique way of freeing us up to focus on the here and now, to be in that present moment and act accordingly. Accepting what is will keep you in the present moment. And finally, focusing on process, not outcomes, okay? That's keeping your eye on the ball, the process. Athletes don't stare at the scoreboard, the outcome. They keep their eye on the ball. And developing the right process goals for you as a trader is key, like I mentioned earlier. And by shifting your focus to the process and not so much on the outcomes, what you're doing is you're taking a lot of pressure off yourself, and you're giving yourself a chance to do something right, something that is within your control, following good process. And when you repeatedly do the right thing and experience satisfaction regardless of whether it produced a win or a loss in your trading. If you're working within your defined parameters and you do this over and over, you're going to build a lot of self-trust and a lot of psychological capital, right? That's the true self-confidence I'm referring to. And finally, I'll just say briefly about leveraging your strengths is really important. And generally, you're going to get a much bigger bang for your buck if you leverage your strengths versus trying to build up your weaknesses. I'm not suggesting to ignore your weaknesses, but most people don't realize how powerful it is to maximize the strengths they already have. Leveraging a strength is, to its maximum can really make up for weaknesses in other areas. So before I finish up, I want to give you guys 10 specific suggestions to consider. First one is to articulate your edge, okay? Are you confident in your edge? Related to this is whether your edge and your plan is a good fit for you. Are you trading someone else's set of rules? So you're going to do much better if your plan reflects who you are, not something you grabbed off the shelf. Second one is mental and physical energy are connected. Okay, you got to manage one and you will impact the other. This is that mind-body connection. Okay, managing your physical energy is going to help you mentally. A few specific tips for you. Okay, one, getting the right amount of sleep, quality sleep that I talked about earlier. Right, you're trading drunk if you're getting less than 5 hours of sleep. Stay hydrated. Drink water. Our brain uses lots of water. Our brain is mostly fat and water, basically. And many people do things that are hydroscopic, that take water away, like drinking caffeine or alcohol. So basically you have to drink about 2 cups of water for each cup of coffee to make up for it. 3, to keep your glucose levels balanced to help that willpower. It's going to be better to probably graze instead of gorge on food, as well as having balanced meals. And I'm going to say that good nutrition is also key to provide the nutrients that form the basis of many neurotransmitters. You want to avoid, if possible, processed foods, fried foods, excessive sugar, and high glycemic foods when possible. The brain may be only 2% of the body, but it takes up 25% of the available glucose and other nutrients. So another example of why this is important is that cortisol, often referred to as the stress hormone, cortisol is, it operates in response to serotonin levels often, and you can impact serotonin levels by your diet, actually. Omega-3 fatty acids, which you get in fish, will actually increase serotonin levels. Believe it or not, there's more serotonin in your gut than there is in your brain. So moving on, let me sort of speed up here. Again, that water is really key. Do not trade dehydrated. Drink lots of water because dehydration results in shrinkage of brain tissue, okay? And when you're dehydrated for long periods of time, for prolonged periods of time, there's a pretty significant adverse effect on your cognitive functioning. So I have a lot of other things here. Cover your P&L while trading. Trade the market, not your P&L. Here's a little assignment for you. For the next 24 hours, jot down every time you think about money or something connected to money. And actually, I think what's going to happen is you probably won't be able to get through an hour before you'll get tired of the assignment because you'll realize that you're constantly thinking about money. It's really hard not to. Awareness of personal context. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? As well as other aspects of the context, which I don't have time to get into today. Seeing emotion as information. Using self-directed questions, which I went over. Mental rehearsal. Okay, visualization is a key that a lot of athletes use. Doing it once a day is very helpful, but I will tell you, many traders do it, and it's not enough. Very often you have to do other things besides mental rehearsal. Identify and leverage those strengths you have. Focus on your process goals, and even consider rewarding the attainment of process goals, okay? Whether or not you did the right thing today, regardless of how much money you made or didn't make, is really important to recognize for yourself. And I'm just going to say that listening to me right now, you're probably not trading, and again, you're probably in a relatively calm state, and you're probably agreeing with a lot of what I've been telling you in this webinar, but I bet a lot of you, will be back to your old tricks again when you start trading tomorrow or whenever that is. If you're serious about doing something about it, I do offer a self-paced course that is about 8 hours of video and 2 workbooks that contain a lot of actionable practical exercises. I shared with you a couple of them today, but there's about 40 or 50 in the course. A lot of the same concepts and actionable techniques that I use with my one-on-one coaching clients. So I'm going to offer a 10% discount. It's just time limited. It's going to be good for about a week till the 20th of May. And for the first 10 folks that go for it, I'm going to offer a 30-minute one-on-one phone or Skype consultation. So with that, if there's time for Q&A, I'm happy to stick around for that, Trevor.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and type them in now. I know everybody was very engaged, it seemed like, taking it in. But so if you have questions, go ahead and type them in. I'll go ahead and read them back. And we'll go from there here for the next 10 minutes or so. So let's just take a minute while you guys type in any questions. Harry's asking, do you still use the M-Wave device while you trade? I don't know what that is, but...
Yeah, I think I know who Harry is. That's a biofeedback device that measures heart rate variability. And yes, I do use it in my trading, and I use it with some of my coaching clients. There are periods of time where I don't use it, but I tend to come back to it periodically. It's very helpful. I use it not only in my trading, but even outside of trading if I'm kind of keyed up and I want to relax. It's a nice little tool.
Okay, there's a lot of people just asking if this has been recorded. It has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well as emailed to you later this week. So I also posted a link to the course book that he just had mentioned. The link is right in the chat box. So if you guys make sure you click that before you leave so you have that open. Okay, here's a question that revolves around just diet and things like that. What are some good foods to graze on during the day while trading?
Great question. Nuts and berries. Think about eating like a gorilla, basically. Nuts for protein, berries contain a lot of nutrients. So I kind of like, personally, what I do is I have a combination of walnuts, almonds, and dried cranberries, and then I kind of have it in a cup in a bowl on my desk. I kind of snack on that throughout the day. I have lots of water. In the morning, I eat a lot of protein. I like to have a lot of blueberries in the morning. I like to drink green tea. Green tea has an ingredient called L-theanine, which has also been isolated. You can buy it as a separate supplement. It has an effect of being kind of relaxing, but also makes you alert. So wild salmon, non-processed foods, staying away from sugar whenever possible. Although we need sugar, you can't avoid sugar altogether. But the idea is the processed foods, very, very unhealthy. And the idea that our body represents a big part of who we are. It's not just the mind that we have to take care of. It's the body, and there's a huge interaction between the two. And as I mentioned earlier, you can actually change the levels of some of the neurotransmitters, especially serotonin, by your diet. You don't have to take necessarily things that are going to work on the neurotransmitters directly. You can actually work on your diet and change the level of some neurotransmitters.
Okay. Mark's asking, how important are one's expectations about the level of trading results he or she can get? So expectations.
Expectations, yeah. Well, you know, it's a good question. I think I'm going to assume that the person asking this question is probably an independent, self-directed trader, and there's a lot of promises that are made out there in the world of trading education. People often promise that we'll teach you how to make X amount of dollars per day or X amount of points, pips, or ticks per day or per week. And so people have these ideas in mind that they should be able to, or they can, or that it's possible to make a certain amount of money every day. And what I'm going to tell you is that I think those are actually very dangerous assumptions because the market is different. The market is an opportunity generating machine, I like to say, but you don't know about the size of the opportunities that it's generating. Some days are going to be bigger opportunities than other days. And so I think expectations need to be as flexible as possible. And I will say the one thing that should be rigid is your risk management. Risk management should be rigid, but your expectations around what's possible in terms of the upside, you need to be very flexible. There will be some days you make very little money or you end down, and other days you could do very well. But this idea that, you know, I'm going to make X amount of dollars every day is generally pretty unrealistic. There are traders, I know part of where that idea comes from, and I've worked with a lot of, and I know Trevor probably knows some of these folks too. I've worked with a lot of former floor traders, and oftentimes floor traders, they would often, they're scalping order flow, and they can get into that mindset of making a certain amount of money approximately per day, or they have these runs where they make the same amount of money per day or close to it. And I think somehow that idea is kind of filtered out among other traders, or filtered into other traders, or I should say conveyed to other traders. And there's this idea that we can all make a certain amount of money every day, and I have not seen it work that way. So I just think it's, I will say that expectations need to be as flexible as possible. And you also need to understand, where do your expectations come from? Chances are, I don't know if you're someone who was successful in a previous endeavor prior to trading, what your experience has been like with success or not, but that's also going to determine a lot about your expectations.
How many breaks throughout a normal trading day, say from bell to bell, do you recommend?
Well, breaks are good, and if you're trading bell to bell, I think you need to take pretty frequent breaks. I haven't seen any specific research that correlates the number of breaks with performance, but I will tell you this, I've seen other research that looks at like students studying, and they know that if you were to take a break at about every 50 minutes to every hour, thereabouts, for 5 or 10 minutes, it tends to, your cognitive abilities stay much sharper. Memory and attention stays sharper. So if you're doing a lot of trades, a lot of heavy trading, a lot of aggressive trading, I'm going to say at least two or three breaks a day, maybe more. I've had one client in the past who, what he does is he'll break up his day into 2 days. He'll trade 2 shifts. He'll trade heavily for a few hours, and he takes a break, works out, does his exercise routine, takes a shower, and then comes back for the second half of the day. That can work too.
Yeah, I remember hearing, I don't know if I read it or heard it somewhere, where we're so fixated on screens and stuff that it's good to step away and just look out at like nature, a tree or the sky or a river, something to just kind of give our eyes a rest from all the screen activity as well.
Exactly. And one thing that I was disturbed about when I heard about this was that, because I exercise regularly myself, I'm in pretty good shape, but because I sit most of the day, even though I exercise for 45 minutes a day, when you sit for long periods of time, regardless of whether you exercise or not, that extended sedentary time that we spend, there's a lot of fat buildup, and a lot of the fine muscle movement is not going to be enough to kind of burn off calories. So what happens is, even if you exercise, sitting still all day is not good. So the moral of that, and I'm getting one of these for myself, is getting a large exercise ball to sit on, or maybe even a standing desk, so you're always in motion a little bit, and not just spending hours and hours and hours sitting.
Yeah, we've used the standing desks here at Market Delta for, I don't know, since six or 7 years, and I know everybody that sees them loves them because, I mean, it's so nice just to be able to stand and either trade or work or whatever. So I do recommend that as well.
Yeah, my wife has one. She loves it.
Yeah. Okay, so last question here. Let's see, there's a couple to choose from. Let me just check here. Well, here's a question from Mark. Is there a way to make trading more fun so that you naturally want to do it? I'll let you end with that.
Wow. Gosh. Well, I'm sure there are ways you can turn it into some kind of a game with yourself, but then the danger with that is that, believe it or not, fear does have a place, and if everything is fun and you don't really care, then the danger is that you could find yourself in a big bad loss and not treat it seriously because it's just a fun game. So I'm kind of hearing embedded in Mark's question, another side issue, which is maybe the passion for trading is not there, or maybe the anxiety around trading is so strong that he's having trouble finding the motivation to trade. So I think the issue is actually something else, not so much about how to make trading fun.
Yeah, I would agree. You wanna love what you're doing all day long. So that's a key point. Okay, well I think that's it. Do you have any closing comments, Andrew?
No, I'll just encourage people to, if they haven't done so already, to go to my website and sign up for my free email newsletter that gives you free trading psychology tips every 2 weeks. It's kind of a no-brainer. It's free and it's very practical.
Yep, I just posted the link there too, guys. You'll see it right there on the left on his webpage. So get signed up for that. We'll get the recording up to YouTube this week, and the email, we'll just send out an email with a link to that soon thereafter. So hopefully you've enjoyed this, and Andrew, thank you again for just taking the time to do this. We all certainly appreciate it, and if there's anything that you guys need from either of us, feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Thank you, Trevor.
Ari Kiev, MD, a practicing psychiatrist and author of numerous books, including Trading to Win, presents Becoming a Disciplined Trader, Techniques for Achieving Peak Trading Performance. Dr. Kiev, in his powerful and animated session, explores how ego, fear, greed, and many other emotions hinder performance and how you too can easily overcome these obstacles. Find out how others just like you were able to conquer their emotions and become successful traders.
Thanks. It's really very exciting to be here with you all. And I'd just like to tell you a little bit about my background so that you understand where I'm coming from. I'm a psychiatrist, and I don't trade options. And I know a little bit about options. I work with traders who trade them, and I have conversations with traders who trade options, but I really can't talk about volatility or delta or gamma or all the other complex things that you all do in your everyday life. I came to trading in the late 80s after having worked with the U.S. Olympic Sports Medicine Committee in 1978, 1979, 1980, 81, working with athletes in terms of trying to help them manage stress and enhance performance. And I'd written a couple of articles about my experience with the athletes, and along about 88, 89, a fellow a trader came to see me with the idea that trading was very much like an athletic event, and he wanted to find out what some of the tricks of sports were. And I began working with him 88, 89. In 92, he started a hedge fund. I used to work about 2 hours a week with the hedge fund. I'd meet with the traders, and we'd talk about various principles of psychology and ways of maximizing performance. And this has progressed over the years so that now I spend close to 4 full days a week working at this hedge fund and in one of its subsidiaries, dealing with traders from the psychological point of view. Not so much in terms of what happened when you were a child, but more in terms of what were you experiencing when you were trading, what was the stress you were going through, what are you doing when you start to look at your trading process that's taking you out of your trades, what mistakes are you making, what psychological habits are interfering with your maximizing your performance. And so that's kind of the angle that I've approached trading from, and hopefully as I share some of my experiences and invite you to share some of yours so that we can interact a little bit about the way in which I coach people, I think you'll begin to see how that all might be relevant to you, or hopefully how it might be relevant to you. Somebody came to see me from California yesterday and said he was looking around to talk to various experts, and he wanted to talk to me to get a quick data dump about what I had to offer him. And I said, I don't think it really works that way. I don't think I can give you a data dump and tell you how it works. What I can do is ask you what problems you're having, and to the extent I can hear those, I can begin to suggest how I might interact with you in dealing with those problems. And in that process, one, you'll understand something about the way in which I work, and two, you may understand something about the way in which you're dealing with your issues and how you might improve upon them. And I suggest that might be a model for this seminar as well. To the extent that you have problems or questions or issues, raise them from the start rather than bring them up at the end, because oftentimes in the last 5 minutes there's a question and an answer which captures the essence of what I'm trying to get across. And if we can get to that early rather than later, I welcome that, and I think you'll find that more interesting. And I think At the same time, it's fair to say that there may be some resistance to that. There may be some reluctance to share experiences, but my view is this, that most of us, when we experience stress, when we experience anxiety, are really experiencing something that's universal, and that as much as we think it's unique to us, it turns out it ain't. Everybody experiences it, and people handle it in different ways, and some people mask it, and some people cover it, and so forth. And to some extent, some of the problems people have in trading stem not from the anxiety, but from their efforts to mask the anxiety so they don't look like they have any anxiety, or they don't look like they're having any problems. And that's oftentimes one of the reasons people stay in trades. They don't want to admit they're wrong. They don't want to admit they've lost money. They don't want to admit that they're perplexed. And if you're macho, then you have even more of an investment in that kind of posture, and oftentimes it can be very costly and very destructive. My sense in dealing with people who've been very successful, master traders, who trade a variety of ways, is that one thing that they're willing to do or have learned to do over time is to really tell the truth, to really face up to their confusion, their distress, their anxiety, their uncertainty, their errors, all kinds of things that we ordinarily don't like to face. And when they do, they're able to kind of begin and move forward because they don't use too much energy in trying to cover up and hide and look like they're in more control than they actually are. They're also in a better position when they adopt that kind of approach to the world of really paying more attention to the market and recognizing that the market is bigger than they are, and that the more they can listen to the market, the more they can take their ego and their intellect and all their self-confidence about their own ability out of the equation, the more they can kind of be more flexible in adapting to what goes on in the market. Let me just ask you as a general question, how many of you experience stress while trading options? I don't see anybody. Anybody doesn't experience any stress? Is there anybody here willing to talk about what their experience is like when they're experiencing stress while trading?
You start to, panic is one word that comes to mind.
What do you experience?
Kind of like fear of losing money, basically. So there's some fear involved.
And what else? What do you feel?
Well, you want to avoid failure, and.
But how do you know you're panicking?
Okay, so what physical things do you feel? Well, there's that knot in the middle of your stomach. That's a good one. And
Sweating?
yeah, maybe like faster breathing or harder to. Like breathing is not easy and relaxed. So.
Anything else? Thoughts of, I got to get out of here?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's easier to kind of lose your strategy, I guess, and just think, oh, I got to close, or I got to switch strategies, and even though you got to stick to one all the way through.
So you find that when you're feeling that stress, you're more likely to stop doing what you've planned to do?
Definitely, yeah. And start to rethink the whole thing.
And does that cycle on itself?
Easily, yeah. It could oscillate pretty easily.
Can you all relate to what he's talking about? I think stress is really part and parcel of the human experience. And under stress, whether it's a real or imagined disaster, the body responds with increased adrenaline, increased alertness, increased visual acuity, increased ability to focus, which is the positive side of the stress. To some extent, one of the reasons people like to trade is because it does create a bit of adrenaline. But ideally, you want to be in control of it. When things are not going the way you want them to, or things are turning against you, you may begin to experience what this gentleman described so well as panic, and that is where your thoughts start racing, where you start doubting yourself, where you start having a variety of physical sensations, heart going fast, shortness of breath, dizziness, maybe confusion, maybe increased suggestibility, maybe increased paralysis, the inability to move, one or the other. So there's an optimum amount of stress and an optimum amount of a way of optimizing your performance when you are under stress, in that you've got more blood going to your brain. Your thoughts are picking up and so forth, and you're more alert for dealing with the situation. But there's a point where it goes beyond that and it becomes counterproductive. And it's under those circumstances that you begin to see the whole range of trading mistakes that people typically make when they trade. And I might mention a few. One is paralysis, where the individual, instead of getting out of a situation, just stops moving. Another is inability to be flexible, where the individual may need to get out but can't, or he may need to change a strategy but can't, or he should stick with the strategy but he can't because he doesn't trust it. All the preparation that you made goes out the window. Stress is also operating in a variety of other ways, where the individual, I mean, one thing I keep encountering in a hedge fund that's fairly successful is people who have really good Sharpe ratios. They really perform well. They make more money on their winning days than they lose on their losing days. They have more winning days than losing days. They're on a P&L curve that's going upwards, and yet because of stress, because of fear, they're unable to use adequate amounts of capital. So they're undercapitalized, even though everybody is telling them use more capital. It's a little bit different than the problem of the individual who's in drawdown and who's panicking and who thinks he's got to increase the size of his position, double up as things are going against him in order to get back what he's lost. It's another kind of repetitive problem. And I think the important thing to recognize, to the extent you can imagine yourself doing whichever of these things you do, that these patterns tend to be repetitive. The individual who is inclined to double down now is inclined to double down 6 months ago, was inclined to do that 2 years ago, is likely to continue to do that in the future unless he really makes an active, conscious effort to change his trading style. Those are the people who get the most visits from the risk manager. Go ahead.
Okay, what you talked about with repetitive patterns, I had a tendency to bail when certain things feel like they're going out of control. It's almost like an emotional thing. But I found that once I started to recognize it and I kind of remembered what the feeling was, it's almost like you can prevent yourself from doing it because you know exactly what you're doing. It's still no less painful, but it's like you can at least figure out what you're doing.
I think that's a takeaway comment that you all ought to take away. One of the best techniques that you can learn is when you're experiencing discomfort and are making mistakes, or before you even make the mistakes, when you're experiencing discomforts, one of the ways to get control over it is to turn on your stopwatch and start timing that discomfort. How long does it last? It could be discomfort because your position's going down and you get out, and then position reverses. And you repeatedly do that and find at the end of 6 months that you've left a tremendous amount on the table. Or it could be, I talked to a group of bankers at Deutsche Bank the other day, guys who traded foreign exchange, where the guy has the inclination to get bigger but doesn't. And then the position changes and he loses an opportunity. It turns out he repeatedly does that. An individual's got to kind of recognize the discomfort, put a time frame on it, discover how long it lasts, and then the next time you start to experience that discomfort, you know, okay, it's going to last for an hour, it's going to last for 3 hours. To the extent that you've put a time frame around it, you somehow or other have compartmentalized it. It turns out the next time it doesn't last 3 hours or 6 hours or whatever it was that the duration of that discomfort was, it's going to last a lot less. The next time, it'll last even less until eventually it won't last at all. That's one way of overcoming or getting control over a habit such as you were describing, of bailing out. If you can ride out the discomfort and build up your capacity to tolerate that discomfort. And different people have different capacities. The guy who's the master trader can tolerate incredible discomfort, or a guy who's a master short player can just tolerate tremendous pain because over time he's taught himself to tolerate that pain, and he knows somehow or other it's self-limiting. Once you've learned to put a time frame around it, it's a very useful comment. Worth, go ahead.
I find for myself when I experience, whether it's stress or disappointment in my own training plan, if I lose my own sense of discipline, if I really journal the day's activity and go back reflectively to learn from my mistakes, that's helped me.
Yeah, that's another good idea. To keep track, whether you've had a problem or not, it's probably a good idea to keep track of your performance so that you can keep reviewing what you've done and you can begin to see where there's room for improvement or where you need to improve or where you need to develop a little bit more knowledge or more information in order to have more confidence in your trade. I'll talk about this later, but one of the big things that I brought from working with Olympic athletes to trading, which perhaps, I mean, that's why I call my book Trading to Win, and it really has been very influential in terms of the traders I've worked with. And some people do it, a lot of people don't ordinarily do it. There's a tendency, or at least it seemed to me, for people to say, I ask the question, how well are you going to do? What's your target for the year? What's your target for the month? What's your target for the day, for the week? Maybe with options it ought to be on a weekly basis, but because of the volatility. But most people say, well, I'll do as well as the market will allow me to do, even though you're nodding. Is that true for you?
Yeah.
You want to comment on that?
I found that when I just play and hope I can get whatever the market gives me, I don't do as well as when I say, this is what I'm looking for. I'm going to set a goal at $2 or $3, whatever, and get out then. I do much better than just guessing at it and hoping the market does.
So why do you not always do that?
Greed. I want to get more, but I'm getting closer to setting goals and using those goals because I feel less stress, and it just works out much better for me.
But you say greed, you say I'm just going to I'm going to do it, I'm going to get as much as I can get,
Yeah.
as opposed to I'm going to get X amount.
Right,
I want to get home runs instead of singles
right.
or doubles. How many people have that problem? Nobody. You're the only guy in the room? You too. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I make sizable bets.
You're what?
Make sizable bets, and I take, don't let my profits run, okay? So I bail out too soon.
Why do you do that?
Because I'm afraid to lose.
He's afraid to lose. Anybody here else afraid to lose?
I think many times it's impossible to tell how far what the market's actually going to give you. It's impossible to pick tops and bottoms. So if you set a predetermined target, either that target's not going to be reached and you're going to be disappointed, or many times the target will be greatly exceeded and you should have stayed with that particular trade. In fact, we talked about this last night. That's been one of my problems. Many times I'll set a target, the market will keep going, and I didn't maximize that particular trade. And you have to maximize some trades to offset the inevitable and numerous losing trades you're going to have.
Okay, it's a slightly different issue than what these two gentlemen are talking about. Let me try to relate to all of them. I think what I'm saying is that there's a lot of power in setting a goal. Now, if you have more control, you don't have control over the market, but you do have control over what you decide. And that's the only place you have control. You can decide, I'm going to make $100,000. The next question would be, what do I have to do to make $100,000? Or what do I have to do to make $10,000? Or whatever the number is. So if you find repeatedly, going back to her idea of using a diary, if you find repeatedly that you've left money on the table because you set a target, you got out too soon, well then maybe you're going to have to change that target, experience, like the other gentleman, some discomfort as you're hanging in there a little bit longer and not sort of getting out so quickly to take your profit, as this gentleman. So they're all variations or combinations of the same thing. If you set the target and you find you still want to get out, but your ability to pick the trade was pretty good and you're consistently profitable, then the answer may be to raise the size of your position, to buy more contracts, particularly if things are going in your direction. So the delta is moving up, your options are increasing in value, and maybe you can add to it. I have a guy I work with who's a macro trader, and he uses options. And when it's working, he just keeps pressing the bet. Sometimes that's a problem on the downside, but in general, it's not. So there may be something to be said if you've got a target and you're asking yourself, what do I have to do to reach that target? Well, I may have to hold it longer. I may have to get bigger. I may have to certainly watch my downside and cut my losses. Somebody earlier was talking about in a lot of trading, the critical thing is not to lose, and I don't disagree with that at all. You got to cut the losses. One of the problems is if you have losses, then as soon as the winners are working, you try to capture that to pay for the losses, which is again an argument for getting more control over the losses early on so that you can play a little bit bigger and a little bit longer. And again, timing it, practicing it, saying, okay, I'm going to hold it for another 2 points, I'm going to hold it for another 2 days, just until you increase your ability. By monitoring your performance, you increase your ability in that particular facet of the trading. Does that answer your question at all?
Oh, makes sense, yeah.
I think, if I can allude to our conversation, I think the difficult thing that traders experience is it's hard to know how much your underlying discomfort or anxiety is contributing to your performance. Because you always have some numbers and the market and all kinds of reasons to explain it. You say, well, yeah, I made a mistake. But if you can master the underlying discomfort and and own your anxiety, increase your capacity to have pain, you can begin to change your performance in significant ways. I think, I don't know if any of you watched the ice skating last night, but there was I saw, well, there was Michelle Kwan and Sasha Cohen, and I think Sarah Hughes was third. Well, last year at the just before the Olympic Games, I had a chance to talk to Sarah Hughes' coach, who's the stepmother of one of our traders. And she asked me, Sarah Hughes had come in third in the nationals. And the question was, well, what does it take to, succeed at the Olympics? Well, one was to decide that she was going to go for the gold. And that was a question. She's only 16. Is it too stressful? Maybe we should just do the best we can. I'll do the best I can, as opposed to go for it. She can go for it the next time. That was the coach talking to me. And I don't know much about ice skating, but I said, she may never get another chance. If she wants to go for it, she's got to decide to go for it. Well, what does that mean? It means starting to change her routine so that she built in a kind of, built into the choreography some smiles. The coach was getting in the stands, and Sarah was projecting to the coach because the judges are looking at the whole, the equanimity and the poise and the charm of the skater. And Sarah was a somewhat mechanical. So she built that in. She also practiced triple jumps, which are tough kinds of jumps to do. She also decided not to stay at the Olympic Training Center and go to all the parties. Michelle Kwan, if you remember, stayed at the Olympic Training Center and had a wonderful time. Just so happened she ended up 4th in the first day of competition, and then was just so relaxed, no pressure on her, that she put out this spectacular performance and won a gold medal. The critical point is that she decided to go for the gold medal, and she prepared for the gold medal by doing things that would make her performance, no guarantee that she's going to get it, no guarantee that she was going to outshine the other people, but only by making that commitment and practicing in terms of a gold medal performance was she able to do it. That's really the point I'm getting at. It means asking yourself, what are the beliefs that you have about what the limitations are in the market, and seeing how much those limiting beliefs color the way in which you approach the trading. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile in 1954, and in the next 20 years, over 250 people broke the 4-minute mile. Whereas before Bannister, people believed that something would happen, your body would break apart, you would die. And he changed the paradigm. And that's really all I'm talking about, is to start asking yourself, what's the paradigm in your mind about what's possible? I'm suggesting. Now, you got to admit that when I came to trading, I didn't really know much about it, and I was bringing a different kind of way of thinking about things into the trading thing. And so at the first year at this hedge fund, we went around the room and I said, okay, how much are you going to make this year? Well, I don't know. How can I tell? It's up to the market. Well, I'm going to do as well as I can. And we kept going around the room. Tremendous resistance to that idea. But the head guy, who's like one of the great traders, said, I'm going to make $30 million. $30 million? We're only running $25 million. He made $30 million. So the next year, we got a little more cooperation. 10 years later, it's now the culture. There's no question but that people set outsized targets. Now, somebody only made $3 million last year. He says, I'm going to make $20 million this year. You question that. But if somebody made $20 million last year, maybe he can make $30 million next year. The question then is, what are you going to do to make $30 million? What do you have to do? Do you need another analyst? Do you need 2 analysts? Do you need to do more work? Do you need to go out to dinner more? Do you need to do more studying? Whatever it is that's essential to produce that result, that's what you have to do. So it's sort of thinking a little bit outside the box in the sense of set the target and then kind of work backwards from it in terms of what things are required to get you to that target. The good thing about options is that you really have very defined targets, you have defined costs, and so on. It lends itself to this kind of modeling and preparation in terms of designing the way in which you approach it. It's a little more, plus you have the underlying, and you can get a lot of information about the stocks that you're trading. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, there seems to be something psychologically limiting, though, about increasing your targets substantially. Like if you're used to trading 300 shares, 500 shares, and so on, you can be quite comfortable at that level. But now you want to move that up, as we really do, to 2,500 shares, to 5,000 shares, and so on, to increase our average daily goal from X dollars to Y dollars.
Right.
That's difficult to do somehow.
No question about it. Absolutely. You all hear the question? It's difficult to keep raising the target. I think if you're trading 300 contracts, maybe the next number might be 400 or 500. Maybe not go from 400 to 2,500. You may have to do it incrementally.
Would that be easier to?
All of this is done incrementally. I mean, everybody has to do it their own way, but yeah, how many are you trading? 300?
300, 500 shares, 1,000 shares, but we want to move it up to, say, the 2,500, 5,000, 10,000 share lots instead.
Well, what would be a comfortable move from 1,000?
You know, probably 1,200, 1,500 range.
I would go to do that. You don't want to stress yourself out. You want to challenge yourself, but not so much that you're overwhelmed, not so much that you're paralyzed. This is not really magical thinking. It's not, well, I'm going to make $1 million and because you said it, you made it. No. You've got to titrate the size based on what your tolerance is. And if you're doing 1,000 and you're comfortable with that, 1,200, 1,300, fine. Do that for a while. And if you're comfortable and you're successful at that, then go to 1,500. That's really the way to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it's kind of scary just to make a big jump of double and triple.
No. This is walk before you run. Do it. But the issue is really more that if you lose money, you want to make it back faster. I don't know if that's an issue for you. That's where people get into trouble. Or they think, it's not costing them that much, and they're not considering that the cost of the premium starts adding up. And they're going for out-of-the-money calls or something like that, and it's really buying a lottery ticket. So, I mean, you really have to kind of manage the whole process. But I think one good technique, which is sort of akin to the idea of timing, is to really practice, and I do this with traders, do it with athletes, a deep muscle relaxation exercise. Practice, where you close your eyes, you take a deep breath, and you let it out, and you tense your muscles, one set of muscles, like you kind of lift your ankle up or lift your foot up towards you so you can feel the calf muscle, and then you stretch it, you tense it, relax it, tense it, relax it, and you do that throughout the body, progressively tensing and relaxing the muscles, taking a deep breath, and really, imagining yourself initially maybe in some kind of comfortable place, on the beach, in a mountain, by a stream. In that kind of visual imagery rehearsal, you can bring yourself into a calm state. Then what you can do is begin to visualize your trades. You see things going, where you see the contract being realized. Begin to do that. Imagine yourself with 1,200, 1,300. Reviewing the trades in your mind and then reviewing the various scenarios that can happen and how you're going to handle them when you're in the situation may increase your ability to take on a bigger position. So there are a little bit of psychological exercises that go along with this.
You touched on compartmentalization as a way to deal with that. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit more too as well? Compartmentalizing these feelings, compartmentalizing.
Well, what I meant by timing well, that was a different kind of issue. The idea was if you're uncomfortable and you time it, whatever the discomfort, or you have a bad day trading, you lost money and you feel miserable, you don't want to trade anymore, just time that feeling. Keep track of it, keep a diary and keep a watch going and see how long it lasts. That gives you a kind of time frame for how long you're likely to experience that feeling. The next time you have that feeling, now you have a time, it's not an unlimited amount of distress that you're anticipating, but actually you know it's only going to last 3 hours, 4 hours, or whatever, however long it lasted, knowing that there's a time on it, it will last much less. And eventually, if you've done that repeatedly, all you'll do is feel the ping or the pang, and that feeling will pass. That's what I mean by compartmentalizing, framing it. But what I'm talking about here is sort of how do you go from 1200 to 1400? You go to 1200 to 1400 in your mind. You can review all your trades before you do them and start visualizing where they're going to go. You've got charts. You can visualize the charts, and you can visualize what you're going to do if it doesn't go the way you want it to go. It's probably one of the more powerful things you can do. What you believe begins to start happening. You begin to get comfortable thinking of yourself as putting on 1,400 contracts. And when you start doing it, and you find, you've prepared it, and now you're realizing it. And then you say, okay, now I'm going to go to 1,600, or I'm going to go to 2,000. And you start visualizing yourself doing that over and over and over again. People do this in tennis. In 1982, I worked with a bobsledder named Jeff Jost, who had crashed at Zigzag in Lake Placid. It's a 90-degree turn in the middle of the bob run. And every time he went down again, he began to oversteer as he came to Zigzag, and he kept crashing. And so what we did was got him to do this deep muscle relaxation, visualization, deep breathing, and then in his mind's eye, do repeated runs down the bob run. It ordinarily takes a minute to get down the bob run. It takes 15 minutes to get back up, and so on. But in your mind, you can go down the bob run in 10 seconds. So you can go down the bob run 100 times, practicing it in your mind. Doing the perfect run, which sort of eliminated his anxiety about crashing again at the site, and imprinted the correct track in his mind. So the next time he went down flawlessly. What I'm saying is you can do the same thing with your trading. Your mind can prepare you to do things that are ordinarily uncomfortable. I talked to a fellow yesterday morning who did a firewalk at a Tony Robbins weekend seminar. And for 45 minutes, they practiced going over the hot coals, thinking cool moss, cool moss. The guy said when he stepped onto the hot coals, he was convinced that there was something cold underneath the hot coals. He walked across. It's just incredible what the mind can do. And I'm suggesting that that kind of maybe hokey technique is relevant to what you're doing as a way of kind of building up your confidence in being able to take bigger sizes.
The times when you want to panic, like what's maybe an example of, if you've worked with someone in the past who you kind of coach them through that, like what would they sit there and visualize?
I think what I encourage people to do, and everybody can do this. I mean, one thing this kind of relaxation exercise is the kind of thing that everybody probably ought to do every day, in the morning, in the evening, or meditation, or kung fu, or aikido, or tai chi, something that gives you some sense of being centered, some sense of being relaxed, so that when you get into those difficult situations, you can actually, rapidly get into a calm, relaxed, centered state. So one is the ability to get into that state. The next thing to do, which is, again, to the extent people have experiences, they say, well, I'm really on a hot streak, I'm really doing well. When I'm on a streak, I can do no wrong. But I don't get into those streaks too often. To the extent that you can put yourself in the mindset of your most successful trade and visualize that trade. Get up every day when you go to trade and start thinking about being in the same state of mind you were in when you had your best trade. When you're in that state of mind, it's going to increase your confidence and increase your ability to be more flexible in handling it. So that's a kind of a preemptive way of dealing with the potentiality of disaster. So you're in a kind of a much more confident state of mind. Again, you can take that from your trading experience, you can take it from some other experiences, whatever experiences you've had in your life that have really kind of made you feel confident, and keep tapping that and using that mindset as a way of dealing with the trading situation. And then on top of that, if you practice relaxation, you can use that as a way of calming down when you're starting to panic. People panic in a variety of situations. The market is the kind of activity that creates a lot of that, but people can learn to handle, people can handle vicious dogs or cobras or a whole variety of things, or fear of heights. They can learn the same techniques would apply. You had a question?
I'm already there. I have no problem making a sizable bet when the conditions are right. But my problem is staying with that. After I make a sizable bet, I start watching. That's all I do. Sit down in front of the screen and watch a stupid stock until it moves. Then, not long ago, I made a bet on their computer that I shorted. Okay, on the 16th of September, that's when they came out with earnings. And it was going my way, but not very much, just 1 point. And then the stock was behaving very well. I mean, it will go down, but it will close up. Will go down and close up again, go down. Sure enough, I closed the position, and the next day, it tanked. I mean, that's the kind of problem I'm having. You know, I cannot stay, I don't have the intestinal fortitude to stay with the position. Had I stayed there, I would have made a good killing, whereas I stay with just for 1 point earnings. Nevertheless, because of the size, I missed some money.
How big was the size?
25,000 shares short. That was very big.
Was that big for you?
Big. I mean, over half a million dollars.
So the answer may be to cut back. What would be a comfortable amount?
Well, I mean...
so it relates to what I was saying to this gentleman here. The objective is really to titrate your tolerance to discomfort. And so you don't want to be trading in such a way that you don't have the comfort for it. So maybe 15,000 would have been a better number.
Yeah, 10,000 is...
10,000 is good. Well, then maybe you have to be with 10,000 and then go to 15.
But once again, at the time, all the conditions were right there. You know, I mean, Dell was pushing touching the upper Bollinger Bands. It was sitting at a moving average resistance. It was also, it is known that when a stock comes with earnings, it tanks next day. So everything was there. Conditions were approaching, you know. I mean, we are entering in September, October, cyclical. So I said, I'm going to bet it big this time. And I stayed there in one trading within 2 points for a whole month. And I stayed for the whole month. And I said, I had to get out of here because this thing is giving me, is getting to be too close for comfort.
Right.
I stayed with it for a whole month, but I was ahead all the time. But I didn't have the fortitude to stay with it. Had I stayed, it's trading around 23 today.
Okay, that makes good sense. But I think my answer is that what would have been the number that you would have been able to tolerate?
10,000.
10. Well, that may be the answer.
Okay.
And then over time, you may want to increase that to 15, maybe 12, and then 15, and keep track of what you're doing and see how, in the next year, how much you can get up to. But you can't go from 10, if you're comfortable, to 25 so fast. And I mean, some people can, and they're probably out of business.
I've done that before, but once again, the same thing happens to me. You know? I mean, I cut it short.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't stay with the trade until it's.
So, but you want to be in that size that would allow you to stay with the position.
That's correct. That's what I like.
So you want to hit a single or a double and not a home run.
Well, I do that. I mean, I get a single or a double, you know, but I like to get a home run. Don't we all?
I think this game is a lot tougher.
It is.
And it's tough for this very reason. And if you could, you know.
Race with your minds.
Well, if you're comfortable with 10,000, would you be comfortable with two different stocks at 10,000?
I rather concentrate on one. I don't believe on diversification.
I see.
I
Okay. Well, then maybe go from 10 to 12
Yeah.
to 14, you know, and just build up your tolerance.
The worst feeling that you can have is when you lose money. The second worst feeling that you can have is when you don't cash in all the chips, when you let the earnings run away from you.
Yeah. So,
I hear you.
you hear me? Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Now, that sounds, you know, simplistic, but you really have to pay attention to what your own tolerances are.
Once again, the
Because-
conditions were there.
No, the conditions are there, but you weren't there.
Yeah, that's
I mean, you're the ultimate the ultimate variable, and you've got to, which is really what I'm saying, is that you have to deal with that potential. In other words, it would be worth it for you to get some meditation tapes or relaxation tapes. I mean, there are all kinds of tapes that people sell in terms of teaching people to relax. And so you could relax and learn to ride the thing out a little bit longer. So that it's like practicing a golf swing. You just have to keep practicing it as opposed to just, you know, missing it. And this is something you can build up. And if you build it up with all the other knowledge that you have, you shouldn't have any problem. But the tendency is not to work on yourself. I didn't bring any slides, but I have some slides that show the guy who's reluctant the guy who's always who's cautious and he's afraid. I went over this with a guy yesterday. He's a technical trader, and it turns out he loses more money on his losing days than he makes on his winning days, and he's always getting out. He's scared. He's afraid to lose, and it's not like you want to lose, but you've got to master whatever it is, the underlying psychological factor that's contributing to it, and you're kind of getting scared. Well, then you got to deal with the scared thing rather than beating yourself. That you don't get anywhere from that, even though you probably are inclined to say, "Oh, what a stupid thing I did," or "I'm really bad," and then you keep doing it. But if you can learn to ride it out, then you can master it, and then all the information, the knowledge that you have, really begins to be useful.
The problem I found is I visualize the market going in the direction of my position. Do you suggest that visualize different scenarios?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, visualize my response to any scenario.
You want to prepare for a variety of scenarios. Yeah. So then you come in and the market goes whichever way. You've got a few scenarios and you know how you're going to play it. You've got a game plan. The purpose of the visualization is to really prepare a strategy to adapt to the market, as opposed to a game plan based on what you want. I mean, you have a game plan on what you want, but the market may not go that way. So you really want to know what you're going to do. If this goes up, you're going to buy, sell, how you're going to handle it. The more you prepare, particularly when you're under stress, as we pointed out earlier on, you're not as quick, you're not as flexible. If you're playing tennis against a player who's much better than you are, you've got perfect strokes, all of a sudden something happens to your muscles, they freeze. you just can't hit the ball. The same thing happens in trading. So under stress, things are going wild, you may not be able to execute, and you may not be able to think it through as clearly as you did before you ever got in there and plan. If it goes this way, this is what I'm going to do. If it goes that way, that's what I'm going to do. So you have a few game plans, and over time, you've got a few that you get good at, so that you know whatever shows up, you're going to have some way of adapting to it. So it's not just an imaginary. One is an idea of what you want, how much you want to make, what do you have to do, how many contracts do you have to have, how long do you have to hold them to make that amount. That's critical. So you ought to be able to say, well, I'm going to make $2,000 a day. Now, of course, you don't control the market, but given that you don't control the ocean either, but you can kind of steer a course in a sailboat across the Atlantic. You have to have the maps and the equipment and so forth. So you can do it. What are you going to have to do given the circumstances? And then you map out all kinds of scenarios.
I wanted to change the subject, with your permission, Dr. Key.
Sure.
From playing singles to a doubles team.
Okay.
I'm an individual trader and have been meeting with some friends the last year, once a month or so. A couple of us have decided to team our efforts from our homes. And knowing that you've worked with trading firms, what are some of the advantages or some of the rules when you start to partner up? And what are some of the things that, hey, these are certain things you want to steer clear of?
Beautiful question. I love that question. I talked to this guy yesterday who runs a large hedge fund, and he has a trader, or he has an analyst who's running a portfolio for him, and he says to me, the problem is this guy is a smart analyst, but he's not running the portfolio the way I want him to. Well, why'd you tell him? Because I don't want to interfere with his creative process, was his answer. I talked to another guy who runs an enormous billion-dollar hedge fund, and we're talking about what's going on. He said, well, I told my trader to short 100,000 shares of Ford. So what happened? He shorted 50,000. So why didn't you tell him to short 50,000 more? I didn't want to intrude or interfere with his confidence. I mentioned those two as just examples of working with someone works to the extent that you're open and forthright and are clear about your objectives, and then see if those objectives are achievable. I've seen too many traders hire analysts and then not know how to manage the analyst. Just didn't know how to talk to him. I've seen instances where the analyst begins to think he's really responsible for, when I talk about traders, I don't mean execution traders, I mean guys who are really trading, who are running a pad, and then they hire an analyst so they have more of an edge, and the analyst is giving them more ideas, and if the analyst's got a strong personality, then the analyst